Hey everyone, thanks for listening in. My name is Nick Cholera, and this is the 2020 Project Podcast. The goal of this project is to share the stories and insights from young adults living with visual impairments. Focusing on those disorders not correctable by prescription lenses, this show aims to help explain what living with one of these conditions as a young person really looks like. I myself was diagnosed with Stargardt's disease, which is a form of juvenile macular degeneration, when I was 15. And the disease has had dramatic consequences on my life in the 7 years since. Wanting to learn more about other visual impairments and the stories of those managing them, I went online and dug into the research. Realizing there wasn't any easily digestible contemporary content addressing the topic, I decided to record this mini-series of podcast episodes to help share the day-to-day perspectives of young adults living with visual impairments. Today, I'll be chatting with Haylie Keller about her experience with being born with a hypoplastic optic nerve, as well as amblyopia, strabismus, and nystagmus. An underdeveloped optic nerve is the leading cause of childhood blindness and visual impairment. Amblyopia and strabismus are comorbid disorders that affect visual acuity and alignment respectively. Nystagmus is a vision condition in which the eye makes repetitive, uncontrolled movements that result in reduced vision and or depth perception. Although specialized glasses can sometimes help visual acuity in patients with amblyopia, strabismus, and nystagmus, the treatment options vary case to case, particularly when they exist in addition to a hypoplastic optic nerve. Haylie is a current second-year student at the University of Alabama studying physics on the pre-optometry track, and the conversation includes her experience living with the conditions, stem cell research she has been involved in, and her take on common misconceptions about people with visual impairments. Please join me in welcoming Haylie to the show, and I hope you all enjoy the conversation. Haylie, thank you so much for your time, and we can just jump into it. So if you just want to start with, a basic introduction of yourself, where you're from, how you chose to go to Alabama, what you're studying, etc.
So, hi, I'm Haylie Keller. I'm a sophomore physics major on the pre-optometry track here at UA. I know, kind of irony with the topic here.
Yeah.
I'm from the Dallas area and ended up at UA for a multitude of reasons, but scholarship was definitely a large portion of it, and then the Blunt Scholars Program.
Super cool. And in terms of maybe growing up, any involvements, either whether it be sports or any other extracurriculars?
So I was not a sports kid.
Sure.
I can explain a little bit more of that later.
Yeah, 100%.
It definitely is tied to my eyes itself. But I was big into debate and youth legislator, so that was kind of the field I grew up in, so to speak, and then music. I've always been involved with something musical.
Very cool. Do you play an instrument?
I play guitar, ukulele, and piano, and some drums.
Awesome. Cool. So I guess we can just start going into the diagnosis process. So first, I guess before that, if you could explain, what you have in terms of your vision disorder, the names of it and how it actually impacts your vision, the best as you can describe it, and how and when you were actually diagnosed with their respective disorders.
So, kind of long story short, I was born with poor vision. I was born at 28 weeks, so really, really early for a kid. And to everyone's dismay, everything was fine except for my eyes, so knock on wood, kind of really lucky in that regard. But as I got diagnosed around 10 months old with kind of the first set of issues, and then more has progressed since then. So let's see, the official diagnosis is hypoplastic optic nerve, which essentially means I have a severely underdeveloped optic nerve. Amblyopia and strabismus, which are two kind of comorbid disorders that force my eyes to wander and cause convergence insufficiency, which essentially means I can stare at something and the image will not translate to my brain, and nystagmus, and then a few others, but those are kind of weird to explain that don't really make a lot of sense. But nystagmus is basically my eyes shake.
Okay. Yeah, and so I mean, I guess growing up with, you know, uh, all of those, how would you explain your vision to people when they ask? Like, how do those, come together to actually form your vision? How would you describe your visual field?
So I guess it's dependent on if the person's asking in person or if they're asking like
Sure.
over text. Because in person, I like my usual first go to is just hand them my glasses, because right now in my glasses I've got trifocals essentially, and like 4 different types of lenses going all at the same time. To give them kind of like a base sense of view. But my best way of describing it is that I've got less than 10% vision in my left eye total. I've been completely blind in my left eye for pretty much as long as I can remember, since I was about 6 or 7 years old. And then my right eye, I'm sitting at probably now less than 50% vision, just to kind of explain like base level. And then I have no peripheral vision whatsoever. So my visual field is kind of limited from the outer end of my right eye to about center of my left eye.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely helpful. Do you know like what your visual acuity is on like the 20, 21?
So left eye is 2600 without correction, 2400 with correction.
Okay.
Right eye is 2400 without correction. Recently it was up to 2180, but I felt my eyes change recently, so we'll see if that's kind of changed or shifted.
Got it. And with the disorders that you have, is it progressive? Is it degenerative? How does each one progress?
So the only one that's degenerative is the optic nerve problem, essentially because it is underdeveloped and me overworking it essentially by being in school and trying to be an active student. It causes a lot of deterioration and a lot of stress on the optic nerve itself when it already is getting so little information. So it could theoretically get worse. I've been through clinical trials, therapies, you name it, to try and kind of mitigate some of those issues at the onset, thankfully.
Definitely, and we'll definitely dig into that a little bit more too. So going back to the diagnosis process, you said you were first diagnosed with the optic nerve problem at around 10 months old?
Yes.
Okay, and then the rest with the eye movement stuff, like when did that come about? And I guess growing up as a, like being young, like 7, 8 years old, like did it get worse? What was the diagnosis process like? Did you go, a series of trips to different specialists? What did all that look like?
Really chaotic, I think I would say, for the first like 10, 11 years of my life. Because especially as you're growing through that period of time, my best way to describe it is your eyes change very rapidly throughout your first 12 or so years of life. And because there was so much going on with my eyes, it involved a lot of going back and forth between specialists. So I'm in the Dallas area. I had an ophthalmologist in Houston at the University of Houston School of Optometry for about 8 years. When I was really little, so just right after I got diagnosed with the underdeveloped optic nerve, I was enrolled in the clinical trial at Duke, using stem cell therapy. I don't know a whole lot in the details of that. Just because I was so little. But to my knowledge, at least with what the study had done, it's prevented a lot more from happening, which I can be very thankful for. But since then, it's been like a regular every 3 months, you're going to the optometrist and ophthalmologist. I've had several MRIs done, especially because with the underdeveloped optic nerve, I run a significantly higher risk of developing MS. Which is like terrifying to think about because it also affects your color vision and things like that, which I've never had great color vision. I cannot see the color yellow whatsoever. And so just a lot of really like taxing and long appointments over and over and over again up until I was about 11 for every 3 months. And then since then it's lessened to about every 6 a year if I can push it, especially being at college and everything. But it was a lot of specialist visits, still is a lot of specialist visits. I work between an optometrist, ophthalmologist, and rheumatologist to make sure everything's okay. It's just a very chaotic process altogether.
Definitely. Do you remember, again, you were super young, so totally okay if you can't, but do you remember how exactly you got plugged in with like that clinical study at Duke? Do you know what any of that was like? You know, who sort of led the charge there?
I'm sure I could find it. I've never... Part of me has never really been interested in it because stem cell therapy kind of weirds me out in a sense. But I know the purpose was stem cell therapy for the purpose of ocular regeneration. Long story short, my grandfather, although he's an OBGYN, he was very plugged into the medical community. He worked at Vandy for a long period of time and then moved kind of all over the place. So he set us up through people he knew at Duke, and then kind of when push came to shove, we somehow landed on this clinical trial. And there's the running joke in my family because they still have a piece of my umbilical cord because the stem cell DNA is still there. So that stays in our freezer, kind of just in case. And then like there's been talks of them re-upping the trial, so taking all of us who were 10, 11, 12 months old when the trial first got going to now. I think I'm one of the older ones at 20, but there are a few that are like now 22, 23 who were involved in the study and like kind of rechecking, seeing what's going on, that type of stuff.
Got it. Yeah, so that's sort of what I was going to lead into is, are you still involved with either that study or like any other studies? Have any others cropped up in your own experience since then?
I've been in 2 other since then, but not necessarily directly for eyesight, if that makes sense. I have autoimmune conditions, so I've been involved in clinical trials for medication for that. One of those medications had fairly severe eye side effects, so they wanted to take someone who had eye conditions pre-existing and see kind of what the effects were. So that's been kind of part of it, seeing like medication, how that affects your eye, whatever. I'm still sort of plugged into the Duke clinical trial, especially because they're looking at like kind of rechecking in with everyone who was involved with it over 2 decades ago now. But it's been kind of on and off with that one. I know when I was 10, we made the trip to the Carolinas to recheck in with some of the doctors and just be like, hey, where are your eyes at? But that's been pretty much it since then with that one.
Got it. And for those that might not know, what is the difference between an optometrist and an ophthalmologist?
So the best way I like to describe it is an optometrist is the person who does a lot of your like basic kind of routine procedure of, look at the Snellen or Sloan eye chart and be like, is the E facing to the right or to the left? Yeah. What do you see? And they're usually the ones in charge of contacts and glasses and that type of stuff. Whereas ophthalmology tends to lean more into the surgical side of things. So, or many like surgical problems that could arise, or like in my case, I've gone through ophthalmology for the more medical quote unquote aspect of things. So the MRIs, the like dye testing, things like that.
Got it. And I guess as your management of the disorders has progressed since you were 7, 8, now you're in college, like what have been your main points of contact? Again, you mentioned, that you're sort of still plugged in with the Duke study, but in terms of your own management, like who are you having those routine checkups with every 6 months or so?
So I've got my optometrist and ophthalmologist back at home, as well as my rheumatologist in my area. Ironically, I now work for the optometrist I've gone and seen for forever.
Very cool.
Which is so fun, honestly. And then we keep in touch with, what's her name? She's a specialist at the University of Houston still, because she's followed me since I was itty bitty, just to make sure like everything's going well, everything's not kind of hopping all over the place with what I can and cannot see.
Sure. I guess having lived with it for as long as you have, like what have been the biggest challenges? When you look around and see, okay, there's people with normal vision, this is what they're doing on a day-to-day basis compared to what I can or cannot do. What have been the biggest challenges for you? And this can be anything: personal, academic, artistic, athletic, anything.
I think top 3, I think for me would be driving. Sure. I am legally considered too blind to drive, and I turned 16 right at the very beginning of COVID. So for like a solid 2 years, I felt kind of normal of not being like, I can't get my license. So I felt kind of normal of like, oh, my friends can't get it too because the DMVs are closed. And then we hit like junior, senior year of high school. Everyone's turning 17, 18, and everyone was getting their license. And I was like, oh, I can't do that. And it's bothersome, to say the least. Like, there are some days I wish I could just get in a car and drive, just because I love driving around with my friends. It's so much fun. Like, we're just playing music in the car and hanging out and all that jazz. But not being able to physically do that myself, or like, I live on campus because of my eyes, because of the public transportation, everything that Alabama has, and I do not have the ability to get off campus on my own unless one of my friends drives me, or I take the bus on Sundays to Target. And that's like as limited as it is. So it's really frustrating. Mm-hmm. I've been able to cope with it, obviously, because it's been 5 or 6 years now.
Sure.
But it's definitely really frustrating. I think on the academic side, dealing with accommodations with people who outwardly have the assumption of, if you are blind, you are dumb. Mm-hmm. That is like my least favorite thing on the planet. I don't handle it well. I get very frustrated very easily when it comes to that type of stuff, because obviously I'm in college. I'm a tough STEM major. You're in college. You're finance, right?
Yeah,
econ.
Finance and econ.
Like, obviously we're successful even with the eye conditions that we do have. So why are you making this outward judgment based off of you getting an accommodations letter before you even meet me? Mm-hmm. That I think, that's definitely probably like out of the top 2, driving and that are like my worst things on the planet because of my eyes.
Yeah. Definitely. No, and definitely can relate to particularly the first one, but the second one, like I said, I'm not personally registered with ODS, so that's not, something I engaged with.
Yeah,
but that's a very valuable perspective. Like, that's that's different. So like, what has that looked like? Engaging with teachers, getting I guess we could start more broadly with the accommodations. What accommodations have you requested through the Office of Disability Services here at Alabama? And what has that process been like? The communication you have with your ODS advisors as well as your teachers in each of your classes, professors.
So I've had accommodations since 4th grade, when my vision started getting really bad. Biggest piece of it for me is enlarged papers, because I have a really hard time seeing anything below 18-point font. Just generally, just to be able to like sit in a normal classroom and not having to be like 2 inches away from my computer to be able to read or pay attention to what's going on. So that's the biggest piece to it. Technology's another kind of side element, I guess I would say. I can't see the buttons on a normal calculator, so having to kind of find a workaround for some of those harder chemistry, math, even physics classes of just like, this is the calculator I can use because the buttons are this big versus like the TI-84, the stupid Casios that they make you use. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think what else in terms of like listed accommodations. Scantrons. I can't see the bubbles. I've never been able to see them. The funniest joke I have with that is, those state tests you have to take when you were younger?
Yeah.
I almost failed one of them because I bubbled everything on the same line. And that's when we kind of figured out, maybe we need to add this.
Yeah, maybe there's something else going on
just
here.
Because, like, I couldn't tell any different, and to me, they all looked like one line.
Sure.
And so I just went with it.
Yeah.
Because what am I supposed to know? I'm, 11, 12, and I'm seeing this for the first time, and I'm just going to roll with it, because I don't know any better. Obviously, I know better now. But, like, it was...
For the record.
For the record. I do know better now. There's a reason I do not use Scantrons. But just, like, funny things like that, kind of over time, have led to a lot of accommodations. So, like, extra time, things like that.
And so, even in maybe later middle school or high school, what did conversations back then look like with your guidance counselor's office, with your teachers back in high school? You're gearing up for college,
there was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of fighting.
What was that like?
Everyone has a very different experience when it comes to like 504 or IEP or general accommodation stuff through middle and high school. I will say I've had some that I've been really grateful for in terms of professors and teachers, and I have had some who I would not wish my worst enemy on. It's been a fight for accommodations because of the same concept of like the assumption that because I'm blind, I'm dumb, when that is very much not the case.
Yeah.
So like middle school, I remember specifically one teacher just blatantly refused. She would not use my accommodations whatsoever, and I ended up having to drop the class because I can't function as a normal student in class if I cannot have my accommodations. That's just kind of point blank period. I know into high school, especially when we were gearing up for like college applications and that type of stuff, my guidance counselor specifically told me, "Are you sure you want to go to college?" And I was like, "Oh, so this is the assumption we're working with. Okay." Which that was a little rough to hear at first, I will say. Yeah, but obviously, sure. I'm here. I'm thriving. So there was a reason to it at the end of the day. Same thing with my 504, I guess, like accommodations coordinator in high school. There were 3, just because they kept kind of changing, and then with COVID and everything, it became a whole issue.
Sure.
But ironically, my accommodation specialist is the reason I am not national merit. I was not given any accommodations whatsoever on the national merit qualifier test. So no calculator that like I could use. I could barely read the words. I was pressed for time because I couldn't read, and then I was struggling to like understand the information. It was bad. Somehow still made like a 1090 on that thing. Don't know how, by the grace of God, but obviously it does. Those don't mean anything now at all. It was just one of those where I was kind of like, really, you like lost me out on a ton of money here because you didn't file the paperwork in time.
Yeah. And for context, Alabama has great national merit scholarships.
It's insane. Yeah. I wish I have something comparable just because of my own academic merit, but it was one of those of like, I really could have, and I knew I could have because I did do well on the SAT with my accommodations.
Yeah.
Like, I knew I could have reached that bar, but the fact that I didn't have my accommodations and things that like fundamentally I needed in place to be able to help me.
Yeah.
It kind of screwed me over.
Yeah. And for those that might not know, like when you refer to your 504 advisor, yes. And 504 accommodations, what is that?
Texas has Section 504,
okay.
Which is essentially our equivalent of accommodations for any student with a disability that does not need to be placed in the special ed program for essentially. It's basically our equivalent of Office of Disability Services here.
Got it. And that sort of leads into my next question is like, how did you go about, after hearing that from your guidance counselor, which was one, untrue and definitely hard to hear, but like, how did you go about making the decision of either where to go to college or what to study even? Did vision play a part in that? And then also where, what research did you do on accommodations offices at the schools you were looking at when you were applying to college? What was all that like?
So it was definitely discouraging to hear at first, but ironically, one of my college essays was about just similar instances all throughout my life and how I am, because of that, in a way, I've become a very spiteful person. You tell me I cannot do something, I will try my hardest to do it just because of pure principle. So that was a big motivator in the college process, just generally. Like, it was the reason I applied to an Ivy League school just out of pure spite. Did get waitlisted, so I do consider that an accomplishment. But it's one of those where I think vision has always played kind of an underlying role in my academics.
Sure. Whether
it's comments like that from guidance counselors or just people who are involved kind of beyond my actual academics. I've always been really interested in like the anatomy of the eye, like why are my eyes like this? So as I said earlier, I'm on the pre-optometry track here.
Yeah.
So ideally the goal is pediatric therapeutic optometry. I want to go into helping kids not deal with what I dealt with, essentially. And it's always kind of been the plan. I made that decision when I was like 8.
Wow.
Of like, I want to go into optometry. I think this is really cool. I think this is interesting. And I still do. Like, even 12 or so years later, I'm still like really kind of overly interested in what the eye does and how it functions. Like, we just finished our ocular anatomy portion of my like anatomy 1 class, and I was all over it. Like, I just find it really interesting how the different elements of it work. So that's always been a very massive like inspiration in what I wanted to go to. So that limited my college search from the get-go. Just schools that
knowing
offered
what you wanted to do.
Yeah, schools that offered pre-optometry programs, schools that offered like clubs I wanted to go into beyond that. So I'm involved with Pre-Optometry Society here. I'm involved with our Bama Hillel, things like that, to just like things I do want to be actively engaged in. And then on the kind of ODS portion of it, I asked around mainly. I knew I wanted to apply to a school that had like a very solid ODS system, that I wasn't going to have to be worried about, you know, the same kind of drama I dealt with in high school that came with having accommodations, especially when you get into those upper level classes. But it was really just a lot of like asking around. I knew University of Arizona had a really great Office of Disability Services. I knew UA had a really great Office of Disability Services, and then just some general other schools that I had applied to. And then it took like that extra step of reaching out. So when I came to tour Alabama for the first time, we reached out to the ODS office.
Got it.
And was like, hey, can we sit down with someone? Like, I just want to talk through this. Because, like, the way disability services worked at my high school was really rough for me. And I needed someone who I knew would, like, be in my corner and, like, be able to actively help me when problems happen. So it was definitely sitting down with ODS that solidified at least a portion of my decision to come to Alabama. And then the roll-in of the massive amount scholarship, and then the Blunt program, which has been tremendous and very easy to work with when it comes to accommodations as well.
Yeah, definitely. And when you thought about, you know, moving away from home, that, you know, that's a big decision. Even for, you know, if you don't have visual impairment or anything like that. What was that like for you, just thinking through any support systems you had with your parents or extended family, whatever it might have been, moving away from home? What were the biggest considerations as it relates to your vision, you know, going away from home for the first time?
It was definitely a little nerve-wracking. I mean, I've always lived in a small family. It's just been me, my mom, and my dad. And I've been in Texas most of my life. So it was that, like, conversation of, do I want to stay in Texas, even though, you know, Texas is a giant state. The closest realistically I would have wanted would have been, like, 4 hours away. We're just far enough so my parents aren't going to pop down on a random Tuesday, but, like, close enough to where I'm surrounded by people I know to a certain extent. I'm near home. But in conversations with my parents, it was one of those that was like, I know I'm going to get a better experience leaving the state, and I know that, like, what I want can be found at other schools, and we will just make it happen. I think the concept of my eyes didn't really set in until I was, like, actively trying to make a decision of where to go. Yeah. And even then, you know, the conversations between different doctors, I'll just, you know, make sure I, like, get that appointment scheduled when I'm home for break. Making sure I keep in touch with some of them if, like, I can feel a change in my vision. So, like, recently I've noticed, like, I'm having a harder time staring at computers for long periods of time. So I reached out to my eye doctor at home and I was like, hey, can we get an appointment scheduled the first week I'm back? And he was like, on it, which is very, very helpful. I absolutely love my support system that I have at home. And then Amy has been a huge help of a support system here, especially with the physical eye piece to it. But then just people through different organizations I'm a part of, my friend group, they've all become really understanding of, so that's how your eyes work. Like, especially later in the evenings, I can't see to be able to walk across campus to Bryce Long where my friend lives. So she's very aware of like past, 7 p.m., just make sure you pick me up, that type of stuff, which I've been very thankful for.
Definitely. And when you say Amy, that is the visual specialist within the Office of Disability Services here at Alabama. Yeah. In your conversations with, when you were deciding where to go to school, and you said you reached out, had a meeting with them when you came to tour the school, what did they say in the conversation that made you think, yes, this is, going to be helpful to me, and this is what I'm looking for in terms of an ODS office at my college?
I think the biggest piece to it was the fact that they do have someone like Amy who is targeted specifically for visually impaired and hearing impaired students. That was definitely a big push to be like, oh, okay, so there's someone who is specifically trained or specifically knowledgeable in the area that I've been struggling with my entire life. That was definitely reassuring. And then we basically kind of gave them the rundown of what current accommodations I had and what the struggles were like with some of those accommodations, and just them being able to reassure, like, we have direct contact with the professors. We can email them, we can go find them in person. They're open communication with us to be able to see, like, if there's any questions. Honestly, the entire ODS portal is really helpful. Just being able to, like, schedule my own tests and not have to rely on someone to schedule them for me has been really nice. So being able to be like, okay, just click this accommodation, depending on what test it is. And schedule it for the day of the test at the same time, but I can get everything I need just in the separate building instead of taking the test in the same class as everyone else. I guess that's more of it, just being able to kind of walk through with them what I was currently dealing with and being like, hey, what can y'all do?
Definitely.
It was very, very helpful.
Definitely.
Because we had that conversation with a couple other schools that I would just kind of narrow down in between, and it played a large role in the decision of cutting some schools and staying with some others.
Definitely. And in terms of like the accommodations that you have gotten, maybe what have you found to be the most helpful? And then just broadly, what has your experience been like here, in terms of academics? Yeah. Either sitting in the classroom or we've kind of already addressed taking exams, but really, in your math, physics classes, seeing the board, all of that'd be helpful.
Ooh, I guess generally, starting off, I've been very lucky to be at UA. I will say, because I have some friends with similar visual issues who are at other universities who are struggling a lot more than I am, just because of the access I have to ODS and the access I have to accommodations just generally. I think for me, the best kind of aiding accommodation is the double time, which sounds kind of odd because, you think everyone can kind of get at least time and a half or double time, but because my eyes don't process things as quickly when I'm staring at a math test or a chem exam or even like a lit exam, it takes longer for me to process things and my eyes get tired really easily. So it gives me that time to be able to sit and take a break, take my glasses off, rub my eyes a little bit if I need it, which is really helpful. And it takes a lot of the stress off my back of like, oh, I only have an hour and 15 minutes to do a 60 question, or let me use anatomy as a better example. I only have an hour and a half to do a 103 question test versus having almost 3 hours to do it. It's just the time difference to be able to stare and kind of visually track has been a significant change since what I had and the significant help. At UA, like I said, I've been very lucky. I've been able to get involved. I've been able to be engaged in classes and do well within those classes. Yeah. Because I'm in honors here, obviously. You gotta keep that 3.5 to stay in honors. But a big part of it to say the least, doesn't come without a bit of a struggle. Like chemistry, for example, the bane of my existence at the moment.
I think that's for everyone.
Yeah.
Based on who I've talked to.
Yeah. Like labs have been a big struggle for me because I am in a very lab heavy area of campus, and I can't keep goggles on because it limits my field of vision. So that's been something that we've had to kind of keep reworking and working through. Microscopes, I have a really hard time because ideally you take your glasses off to view the microscope, but I can't do that because otherwise I just cannot see. So it's been a lot of trial and error. Still with some error, but manageable. And kind of just powering through to a certain extent. But like I said, I've been lucky. There hasn't been a whole lot of pushback accommodations wise. There hasn't been a whole lot of teachers blatantly refusing, which I can at least say is a big step up from what I used to have.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. In terms of, pre-optometry, looking forward in terms of your career, in terms of future schooling, how are you thinking about what your vision is going to do over the next medium to long term? What do you know about that? How do you think about it? And how do you think about that influencing your career going forward?
I try my best not to think about it in the nicest way possible.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with something that is degenerative to a certain extent. It definitely puts a time limit on your ability to do things.
Yeah.
And in kind of an all-encompassing way, it is one of my worst fears to go completely blind. And I think everyone who's collectively dealing with vision loss to a certain extent, it is a fear. I don't know if it's their worst fear, but for me, it's definitely a big fear.
Definitely. Yeah.
I was like saying, I bet you can imagine just the ability to not do something you've set your mind to is a little nerve-wracking. And I've definitely thought about it long term, like what are my options otherwise, and that's why I've looked at additional degrees to kind of cushion myself. Like I do want to get a master's in public health at some point, ideally while I'm in optometry school, to kind of cushion some of that. But I think just being prepared for the worst and hoping for the best is kind of the way I've been going about it. If my eyes change, they change. There's nothing I can do about it. So what can I do to still be proactive and productive while I can do it? It is kind of the way I look at it. So, obviously the plan is still optometry school. The plan is to do kick butt, take names.
Yeah, of course.
That's kind of the deal. And just see where it takes me after a certain point.
I appreciate you talking through that. I know, it is a worst fear, so it's kind of tough to talk about.
It is nerve-wracking to think about that. Oh goodness, there will be a point in time where I cannot see anything.
Yeah. But I appreciate you talking about that. I really do. I guess sort of getting close to wrapping up.
Yeah.
In terms of, we talked about, academics, career, things like that. In terms of, socially.
Yeah.
Are there any misconceptions that you've maybe dealt with, or maybe they don't rise to the critical level of saying, dealt with? Maybe they're just things that you've observed. Any misconceptions or anything you've, let's say there's someone that's recently been diagnosed with some sort of juvenile condition. Anything that you'd tell them to watch out for, that they might not hear from their doctor, etc.?
I think the biggest thing is listening to your own body. You know yourself better than anyone else, and if you're staring at a board in class, and even if you're sitting front row as close to the board as you can be, it's still, you hit a point in time where it's getting blurry, or your eyes are having a really hard time staring, or a really hard time just maintaining focus, then it's time to probably go get something looked at. I know that's taken a long time for me, especially as someone who wants to stay very focused on my task and not really think about the external factors that I've got going on, but making sure you're actively listening to yourself and listening to what your body needs. Like if your eyes need rest, like say you've been going and studying, pulling an all-nighter, that type of thing, just to make sure you're prepared for a test or a project, give your eyes a break. It's not worth risking your own vision just to be able to say you finished something, honestly. I guess social misconception wise, I'm trying to think. Jokingly, I want to say no, I will not let you try on my glasses, because I feel like that's the running thing. You introduce yourself and kind of somehow in the conversation it comes up that you're blind as a bat, and they'll be like, how many fingers am I holding up, or asked to try on your glasses, and I'm like, no, please don't. It's funny once or twice, but believe me, after 20 years of hearing it, I'm tired of it.
Yeah.
I also just don't want to give you my glasses to try on. one, feels kind of unsanitary. Two, I need them. It's not like it's crutches or something like that where you can be like sitting down and your friend tries them out for like 2 seconds and then they hurt because they're not used to crutches.
Yeah.
These are like my lifeline. So I don't want to be handing over my glasses to you. Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah. No, definitely. In terms of any, smaller level tips in terms of things that you found helpful, whether it's technology, not being able to drive, is it Uber, is it, something or the other that you've really found helpful in your own day-to-day?
Being somewhere where public transportation is accessible.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big factor, especially on the accommodation side of campus for me, especially because I cannot drive and I'll never be able to drive. So being able to be somewhere where there is bus systems, and obviously that's turned into a long-term conversation. I can't go home necessarily to live where I've lived most of my life because there is no public transportation. And I don't want to be paying an obscene amount to Uber and Lyft everywhere. So looking at cities or places that do have larger ability to transport larger amounts of people is definitely like a long-term thing, just kind of being aware of what you need or being aware of kind of how you need to go about things given your situation at the moment. I think, in terms of like smaller tips, I think just being aware.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that sounds really cliche to say, but just being aware. People aren't going to go out of their way to accommodate you. And even though I know personally I'm someone who lives out of spite and tries to do everything I can, not everyone is like that. And as long as you're kind of acknowledging the fact before you step into a scenario that people aren't going to be accommodating right off the bat, it's going to be a lot more helpful for your mental process as well as like the physical process. Because I think going into something with the expectation that, they're going to want to help me right away can be kind of unhealthy. Going into a scenario and being like, I need this, this, and this. They're not going to give it to you unless you explain why and show them why and kind of take them through the steps of what you see until they get it, until it like actually clicks with them.
Definitely. So really just like not coming in with expectations as much as you'd like to, but trying to avoid coming into anything with expectations.
The bar is low.
Yeah.
The bar has to stay low unless, you have someone truly exceptional who has set the bar. And I will say Amy here has definitely set a bar. But, beyond UA, I do have to kind of go into a scenario and be like, the bar is at the floor.
Yeah.
And, it can go up and it can go down. And you just got to kind of roll with the punches with it.
Yeah, definitely. Any final tips to anyone, dealing with this or that might have someone in their life dealing with it, or people that just want to learn more? And you've covered a lot, so if you have nothing to add, no worries, but we'll wrap up there.
Make some glasses tips. Make sure you get yourself a little glasses repair kit. I didn't realize how much I needed it until last week. I've got 3 pairs of glasses just because I'm a girl. I like to change.
Things happen.
I like to change how they look with certain outfits, but also things happen. I've always had a backup pair just in case. And the other pair that I normally wear, just one day randomly, the arm just fell off, which is the first time in 19 years that has happened to me. I was like terrified. I was like, what is going on? What happened to my glasses? And I tried repairing it myself. So I will say I did give it a shot. Apparently the bracket was bent, so there would have been no way I could have repaired it. It is fixed now. I did get it fixed. But
cheers.
Like exactly, having something to like for those worst case scenarios is honestly the best thing on the planet. Like I perpetually have eyeglass cleaner in my backpack. I've got the wipes in my backpack. I've got like a little screwdriver in my backpack just in case. Because, like I said before, these are my lifeline. I can't do anything without them. So being prepared for the absolute worst case scenarios, it will save you. I promise.
Cool. Well, we'll wrap up there.
Yeah.
Haley, thank you so much for your time.
Course.
I've learned a lot. Hopefully everyone listens also learns a lot. Just thanks again for your time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.